Alright, let me take you back to a time that honestly still feels a little surreal to think about. It all started innocently enough, as these things often do. I remember the day I first saw the apartment. It was nestled on a quiet, tree-lined street, a charming old building with those classic bay windows that just screamed character. The afternoon sun streamed in, highlighting the dust motes dancing in the air, but even that felt kind of magical. The landlord, a man named Mr. Henderson, seemed perfectly pleasant during the showing. He had this easy smile, a slightly rumpled suit, and a way of speaking that made him sound incredibly reasonable, almost fatherly. He talked about the building's history, the great neighbors, and how he took pride in maintaining his properties. I was sold. I truly believed I had found not just an apartment, but a home. Moving in was a flurry of boxes and excitement. I spent weeks making the place my own, painting the walls a soft, calming gray, arranging my books and hanging art. Everything felt right. The first few months were uneventful, a blissful period of settling in. I'd occasionally see Mr. Henderson around, usually just a quick wave or a brief chat about the weather. He maintained his affable demeanor, and I had no reason to suspect anything was amiss. But then, the small things started. They were subtle at first, almost ignorable. A leaky faucet that dripped persistently. A draft from one of the old windows that no amount of weather stripping seemed to fix. When I first contacted Mr. Henderson about the faucet, he was apologetic, saying he'd send someone right away. A week passed. Then, too, I sent a polite follow-up email. He responded promptly, assuring me he was just trying to find the right person for the job, someone reliable. Another 2 weeks. By this point, the drip had graduated to a steady, annoying plink, plink, plink against the porcelain. I ended up tightening it myself, which temporarily slowed it down, but it was clear the fixture needed replacing. That was the first tiny crack in the illusion of the perfect landlord. Then came the heating issue. Winter arrived with a vengeance that year, and my apartment, despite its charm, felt like an icebox. The old radiators clanked and hissed, but the warmth they produced was barely noticeable. I bundled up in sweaters and blankets, convinced it was just an old building quirk. But my neighbors, who I'd gotten to know a little better by then, started complaining too. Their apartments were also freezing. When I brought it up to Mr. Henderson, his tone shifted slightly. He became a little more evasive, a little less apologetic. He mentioned the age of the boiler, the cost of repairs, implying it was a monumental task beyond his immediate control. He suggested I just use a space heater. A space heater, he said, would be more efficient anyway. I remember feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the apartment temperature. This wasn't the helpful, fatherly landlord anymore. This was someone who was deflecting. The real turning point, the moment I realized this wasn't just about minor inconveniences, was when the ceiling started to stain. A dark, spreading patch appeared in the corner of my living room, right above my favorite armchair. It grew steadily, a testament to some unseen leak from the apartment above or the roof itself. I immediately sent Mr. Henderson an email, attaching photos. This was serious. This wasn't just a dripping faucet. This was structural, potentially damaging to my belongings, and a health hazard. His response this time was slow, almost a week later. He simply replied that he would look into it. No apology, no timeline, just a vague promise. Another week went by, and the stain darkened, a faint smell of mildew beginning to permeate the air. I called him. He didn't answer. I left a voicemail, emphasizing the urgency. No call back. That's when a knot of unease started to tighten in my stomach. This wasn't normal landlord behavior. This wasn't just a busy person. This felt like active avoidance. I started keeping a log. Every email sent, every phone call made, every interaction, no matter how brief. I noted the date, the time, the specific issue, and his response, or lack thereof. I took more photos, time-stamping them on my phone. The growing stain, the still dripping faucet, the thermostat stubbornly stuck at 60 degrees, despite the boiler supposedly being on. I didn't know it yet, but I was instinctively building a case. I was documenting the neglect. One afternoon, I came home to find a notice taped to my door. It wasn't about repairs. It was a rent increase notice, effective in 30 days. A substantial one, significantly higher than what was reasonable for the area, especially considering the conditions. My jaw literally dropped. The audacity of it, to raise the rent while actively ignoring pressing maintenance issues, felt like a slap in the face. It felt like he was trying to push me out, or at the very least, squeeze more money out of me, without providing the basic services he was legally obligated to. That notice, more than the leaky ceiling or the cold apartment, ignited something in me. It wasn't just frustration anymore. It was a fierce sense of injustice. I wasn't just a tenant, I was a paying customer, and he was failing spectacularly at his end of the bargain. I remembered something a friend had told me once about tenant rights. It was a vague memory, but it sparked a thought. I wasn't powerless. I had rights. I spent that evening doing a deep dive into tenant-landlord laws for my state and city. It was a rabbit hole of legalese and obscure statutes, but I devoured it. I learned about implied warranties of habitability, notice requirements for repairs, and the legality of rent increases. The more pattern of harassment and retaliation. She detailed the broken window, the leaky roof, the mold, the faulty wiring, the lack of heat, each accompanied by photographic evidence and my meticulously kept notes. She spoke of my attempts to communicate, my adherence to legal protocols, and his consistent failure to uphold his end of the lease agreement. When it was my turn to speak, a wave of nerves washed over me, but Emily's presence beside me, her reassuring nod, gave me strength. I recounted the threatening phone call, reading directly from my notes, my voice steady despite the tremor in my chest. I described the unannounced visits, the dark hallway, the overflowing garbage chute, the feeling of being watched. I spoke of the fear, the anxiety, the disruption to my life, but also the firm belief that I had a right to a safe home. I looked directly at the judge, not at my landlord, and poured out my truth. The landlord's lawyer, in turn, tried to paint me as a disgruntled tenant trying to get out of paying rent, a troublemaker seeking to exploit the system. He dismissed my evidence as fabricated or exaggerated, his client's actions as merely attempts to collect overdue rent. My landlord himself took the stand, a picture of feigned indignation, denying all accusations of harassment and claiming he had always been a diligent and responsible property owner. His practiced veneer of false pleasantry was back, a stark contrast to the raw fury I had heard over the phone. He swore under oath that he had never received specific repair requests, that the apartment was in perfect condition, and that I was simply looking for an excuse not to pay. The audacity of his lies made my blood boil, but I remained silent, as Emily had instructed, letting her counter his every fabrication with cold, hard facts and evidence. The judge listened intently, occasionally interjecting with questions for both sides. The process was slow, deliberate, and at times frustrating, as I watched my landlord twist the truth with such ease. But Emily was relentless. She cross-examined him, pointing out inconsistencies in his testimony, highlighting the dates of my repair requests versus his claims of ignorance, contrasting his denial of harassment with my detailed logs and audio recordings. She presented the certified mail receipts, proving he had received my initial formal letter and partial payment. The hearing stretched over several hours, feeling like an eternity. By the end, I was emotionally drained, but also a strange sense of calm had settled over me. I had done everything I could. I had presented my truth. The decision was now out of my hands. The judge reserved her decision, stating she would review all the evidence and issue a ruling in writing within a few days. As we left the courtroom, my landlord shot me another venomous look, but this time it felt less potent. I had faced him, not just in my apartment, but in a formal setting, and I had not backed down. The waiting period was agonizing. Every email notification, every knock on the door, sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I tried to distract myself with work, with friends, but the outcome of the case was a constant hum in the background of my thoughts. My home, my future, hung in the balance. Finally, the email from Emily arrived. The subject line was succinct: ruling. My heart pounded as I opened it. I scrolled down, my eyes scanning for the key phrases. The judge had ruled in my favor. Not only had she denied the landlord's unlawful detainer, meaning he could not evict me, but she had also found him in breach of the lease agreement due to the unaddressed repairs and his subsequent harassment. She ordered him to immediately complete all outstanding repairs, provide me with a rent abatement for the period the apartment was uninhabitable, and pay my legal fees. Furthermore, she issued a stern warning against any further attempts at harassment or retaliation, stating that such actions would result in severe penalties. A wave of relief so profound it almost buckled my knees, washed over me. I reread the document several times, tears blurring the words. It was over. I had won, not just a legal battle, but a personal victory against intimidation and injustice. The weight that had been pressing down on me for months lifted, replaced by a feeling of profound gratitude and vindication. I immediately called Emily, my voice thick with emotion. She sounded genuinely pleased. "I told you we had a strong case," she said, her voice warm. "You were brave, and you did everything right. This is a significant win, not just for you, but it sends a clear message to landlords like him." The feeling was indescribable. It wasn't just about the apartment, or the money, or the legal fees. It was about dignity. It was about proving that even against a powerful, well-connected adversary, a single person, armed with truth and tenacity, could prevail. I had stood my ground. I had fought for my home. And I had won. The battle had been long, arduous, and terrifying. But the taste of victory was sweet, a testament to resilience, and a reminder that sometimes the biggest fights are fought not with fists, but with meticulous notes, unwavering resolve, and the quiet courage to stand up for what is right. My apartment, once a battleground, now felt like a sanctuary again, a true home, earned through struggle and defended. The phone slipped from my ear, landing softly on the sofa cushion beside me. The silence that followed was profound, a vast, echoing space where the cacophony of worry and fear had once resided. It was over. The words kept replaying in my mind, a joyous mantra. I had won. A strange, almost disorienting lightness filled my chest, like a heavy weight had been lifted, not gradually, but in an instant, leaving behind an unexpected void. I sat there for a long time, simply breathing, letting the reality of it sink in. My gaze drifted around the living room, taking in the familiar objects, the worn armchair, the overflowing bookshelf, the plant on the windowsill. Each item seemed to hum with a new, quiet energy, imbued with the peace that had finally returned. The next few days were a blur of practicalities and profound emotional processing. My lawyer, whose calm demeanor and sharp intellect had been my anchor through the storm, followed up with a detailed email outlining the settlement, the timeline for the landlord's compliance, and the final payment of legal fees, a sum I was now more than happy to pay. She had earned every penny, and more. Her message ended with a personal note, expressing her admiration for my tenacity and resilience, and offering to meet for a celebratory coffee once everything was truly finalized. I accepted with genuine gratitude. News of the victory spread quietly. A few trusted friends, those who had endured my anxious phone calls and offered unwavering support, received the update with shouts of triumph and heartfelt congratulations. Their relief mirrored my own, a testament to how deeply my struggle had impacted them too. My mother, who had been a constant source of worry and encouragement, cried tears of joy when I called her, her voice cracking with pride. It was a shared victory, in a way, a collective sigh of relief. The landlord, a man whose name I now rarely thought of, was instructed to pay the agreed-upon sum and to undertake the necessary repairs within a strict time frame. To my surprise, there was no further resistance. Perhaps the clarity of the court's decision or the threat of further legal action had finally broken his obstinacy. The repairs, long overdue and the initial spark of this entire ordeal, began a week later. Workmen, not the usual shoddy crew I had grown accustomed to, but a professional team arrived punctually. They fixed the leaky pipes, patched the water-damaged ceiling, and finally, after months of neglect, addressed the faulty wiring that had been a constant low-level anxiety. I watched them work, a quiet observer, feeling a deep satisfaction. Each hammer blow, each fresh coat of paint was not just a repair, it was a reclamation. It was the physical manifestation of my hard-won peace, the restoration of my home to its rightful state. With the repairs completed, the apartment truly began its transformation from a scene of conflict to a place of genuine repose. The air felt cleaner, the light brighter. I found myself lingering in rooms, simply appreciating the solidity of the walls, the warmth of the sun through the now clean windows. I rearranged furniture, not out of necessity, but out of a desire to imbue the space with a renewed sense of purpose, a personal touch that had been overshadowed by the ongoing battle. I bought new plants, their vibrant green leaves, a symbol of life and growth, placing them in strategic spots where the light was best. I cooked more, the kitchen no longer a place of hurried meals consumed amidst worry, but a space for creative exploration, the aroma of spices and herbs filling the air with comforting scents. The financial compensation, while not extravagant, was enough to cover the legal fees and the emotional toll. It allowed me to breathe a little easier, to replenish savings that had been depleted by the unexpected expenses of the lawsuit. More importantly, it was an affirmation. It was the court's declaration that my time, my stress, my suffering had a tangible value. It was a recognition of the wrong that had been done. I used a small portion of it to treat myself to something I had long desired but deferred during the lean months of litigation. A beautiful, handcrafted wooden desk for my writing, a place where I could now sit and create, free from the shadow of impending eviction. Life in the building also shifted subtly. The superintendent, a kindly man who had often seemed caught between his duties and his sympathy for the tenants, now offered a warmer smile, a more direct gaze. Perhaps he too had felt the pressure from the landlord, and my victory had, in some small way, alleviated his own burden. Other tenants, those I occasionally encountered in the hallway or the laundry room, seemed to look at me differently. There was a quiet respect in their eyes, a knowing nod that conveyed their understanding of what I had endured and what I had achieved. I had not set out to be a champion, but in defending my own small corner of the world, I had inadvertently become one for others who might one day face similar struggles. Weeks turned into months. The initial euphoria of victory gradually settled into a deep, abiding sense of peace. The apartment, once a source of anxiety, now genuinely felt like a sanctuary, a true home. I woke up each morning without the familiar knot of dread in my stomach, able to greet the day with an open heart. The quiet hum of the refrigerator, the gentle creak of the floorboards, the distant city sounds, all contributed to a symphony of normalcy, a melody I had longed for. Yet, the experience had undeniably left its mark. There were subtle shifts in my own behavior, lingering echoes of the ordeal. I found myself still double-checking the locks, a habit ingrained during months of feeling vulnerable. I paid closer attention to the building's maintenance, noticing small details, not with suspicion, but with a newfound awareness, a quiet vigilance born of experience. These were not fears exactly, but rather the scars of a battle well fought, reminders of the strength I had discovered within myself. The relationship with my lawyer, Ms. Davies, deepened beyond a mere professional connection. We did indeed meet for that celebratory coffee, and it stretched into a long, candid conversation. She shared insights into the legal process, the nuances of the judge's temperament, and her own satisfaction in securing justice. I, in turn, expressed the profound impact she had had on my life, not just in winning the case, but in restoring my faith in fairness, in the possibility of fighting back. She became a trusted confidant, a symbol of integrity in a world that had, for a time, felt unjust. We even discussed the possibility of my sharing my story, perhaps anonymously, to help others navigate similar landlord-tenant disputes. The idea intrigued me, a way to channel my experience into something positive, to offer a beacon of hope to those feeling trapped and powerless. The apartment itself became a living testament to my journey. The walls, once a canvas for my anxieties, now held a different kind of story. The sunlight streaming through the windows no longer felt like a fleeting moment of peace before the next problem, but a constant, reassuring presence. I spent hours simply being in the space, reading, writing, listening to music, truly inhabiting it. Every corner held a memory, not just of the struggle, but of the perseverance, the moments of doubt overcome, the small victories leading to the ultimate triumph. I began to see my home not just as a physical structure, but as an extension of myself, a reflection of my resilience. The experience had fundamentally altered my perspective on life. I had always considered myself a relatively strong person, capable of handling challenges. But this was different. This was a sustained assault on my peace of mind, on my very sense of security. It had forced me to confront my deepest fears, to stand firm when every instinct screamed to retreat. I learned that true strength was not the absence of fear, but the courage to act in its presence. I learned the immense value of meticulous documentation, of unwavering resolve, and of finding the right allies. The quiet courage I had mustered had been more potent than any outward display of aggression. I often reflected on the concept of justice. It was not an abstract ideal, I realized, but a tangible outcome, one that required immense effort, sacrifice, and the belief that it was attainable. It was not always swift, nor was it always easy, but when it arrived, it was a powerful force, capable of righting wrongs and restoring balance. My victory was a small one in the grand scheme of things, a single individual against a powerful landlord, but it resonated with a universal truth, that every person deserves to be treated with dignity, and that no one should be made to feel powerless in their own home. This newfound understanding of justice extended beyond my personal experience. I found myself more attuned to stories of injustice, more empathetic to those fighting their own battles, whether big or small. The idea of advocacy, of using my voice and my experience to support others, began to take root. It was a nascent thought, still forming, but it felt like a natural progression, a way to honor the struggle I had endured. Perhaps I could volunteer at a tenant rights organization, or simply share my story with those who felt alone in their fight. The possibilities, once daunting, now felt empowering. The quiet strength I had gained was perhaps the most profound change. It wasn't a boisterous confidence, but a deep internal knowing. I had faced down a formidable opponent, navigated a complex legal system, and emerged victorious. This knowledge settled within me, a solid foundation upon which I could build the rest of my life. Future challenges, while inevitable, no longer seemed insurmountable. I knew I had the capacity to endure, to adapt, to fight for what was right. One evening, as the sun dipped below the city skyline, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, I sat by my window, a cup of tea warming my hands. The apartment was bathed in a soft, ambient light, peaceful and still. I looked out at the familiar rooftops, the distant glimmer of streetlights, the quiet rhythm of the city. My home. It was truly mine, not just in ownership, but in spirit. It had been a battleground, a sanctuary, a classroom, and ultimately, a testament to resilience. The journey had been long, arduous, and terrifying, but the taste of victory, now a lingering sweetness, was a constant reminder that sometimes the biggest fights are fought not with fists, but with meticulous notes, unwavering resolve, and the quiet courage to stand up for what is right. My apartment, once a battleground, now felt like a sanctuary again, a true home, earned through struggle and defended. And as I watched the last sliver of daylight fade, I felt a deep, abiding peace, a quiet strength that promised many peaceful years within these walls, years built on the firm foundation of a hard-won victory. The story of this apartment, and of my life within it, had truly just begun. It was a story of quiet triumph, of a spirit unbroken, and of a home reclaimed. The quiet triumph was not a sudden explosion of joy, but a gradual unfolding, like a time-lapse of a flower blooming after a long winter. Each morning, the first rays of sunlight filtering through the blinds felt different. They no longer carried the weight of impending doom, the subtle anxiety that had been my constant companion for so long. Instead, they illuminated dust motes dancing in the air, transforming them into tiny, glittering particles of peace. The very act of brewing coffee became a meditative ritual, the gurgle of the machine a comforting hum, not a prelude to another day of battle. I found myself lingering more often by the window, observing the city below without the usual internal commentary of worry. The streetlights, once mere markers of the urban landscape, now seemed to wink back at me, complicit in my quiet victory. The sounds of distant sirens, once a jolt to my nervous system, now registered as background noise, a reminder of a world that continued its ceaseless churn, while my own small corner had finally found its equilibrium. My hands, which had spent countless hours sifting through documents, typing frantic emails, and gripping a pen with white-knuckled determination, now found solace in simpler tasks. I started by meticulously cleaning the apartment, not out of necessity, but out of a deep-seated desire to scrub away the lingering traces of the past struggle. Every surface polished, every corner dusted, felt like an exorcism of old anxieties. The scent of lemon cleaner replaced the stale air of stress, and the gleam of polished wood reflected a new, brighter future. Then came the urge to redecorate, not drastically, but with intention. The apartment had always been a reflection of my taste, but now it felt like a blank canvas, awaiting a truer, more authentic expression of my reclaimed self. I started with the walls. The off-white paint, a neutral choice made years ago, now seemed bland, a silent witness to too much turmoil. I chose a soft muted blue for the living room, a color that evoked the calm of a clear sky. The act of painting was surprisingly therapeutic. Each stroke of the roller, each careful edge brushed, was a deliberate act of creation, a tangible manifestation of my freedom. The scent of fresh paint, sharp and clean, was a welcome aroma, a promise of new beginnings. I bought new throw pillows, their textures inviting, their colors vibrant yet harmonious. A new rug, soft underfoot, replaced the old one that had absorbed too many pacing steps and silent tears. These were not grand changes, but small, personal touches that imbued the space with a renewed sense of warmth and belonging. Each item placed, each decision made, was a quiet declaration. This was my sanctuary, my canvas, a reflection of the true self I was painstakingly uncovering. It was a space where every object held meaning, every hue resonated with a newly found peace. My attention then shifted to the bedroom, a room that had long been a place of restless nights and unspoken anxieties. The heavy, dark curtains that once offered a false sense of security were pulled down, replaced by sheer linen drapes that invited the morning light to pour in, a gentle awakening rather than a harsh intrusion. The old, worn bedding, a relic of comfort sought in sorrow, was discarded. I chose crisp white sheets, light and airy, adorned with a simple woven throw and a calming sage green. The transformation was subtle but profound. The room no longer felt like a place to hide, but a haven for restorative sleep, a quiet chamber for dreams untainted by past shadows. I cleared out the overflowing wardrobe, donating clothes that no longer fit my spirit, leaving behind a curated selection that felt authentic, comfortable, and truly mine. Each empty hanger, each cleared shelf, was a silent testament to the shedding of old layers, making space for the new. The kitchen, always a functional space, now beckoned for a similar rebirth. It had been a place of hurried meals, often eaten alone, or a frantic rush to prepare something for others. I began by decluttering the countertops, removing every extraneous appliance and forgotten gadget. The old, chipped mugs, souvenirs of past relationships that had long lost their luster, found their way into a donation box. I invested in a set of simple, ceramic bowls and plates, each piece feeling substantial and honest in my hands. The pantry, once a jumble of half-used packets and forgotten tins, was meticulously reorganized, every item given its rightful place. I started cooking again, not out of obligation, but out of a genuine desire to nourish myself. The scent of freshly chopped herbs, sizzling vegetables, and warm bread baking in the oven filled the air, a fragrant symphony that spoke of care and self-love. I found joy in the simple act of preparing a meal, savoring each ingredient, each flavor, a mindful practice that grounded me in the present moment. The kitchen, once a mere utility, became a vibrant hub of creativity and sustenance. As the physical changes took root, so too did a deeper internal shift. The house, once a collection of rooms I inhabited, slowly transformed into a living extension of myself. The muted blue of the living room walls brought a quiet serenity to my evenings. I would sit on the newly upholstered armchair, a book open in my lap, and feel a profound sense of belonging, a feeling that had eluded me for so long. The soft rug under my bare feet was a comforting reminder of the warmth I was cultivating within my own life. I started to notice the subtle interplay of light and shadow throughout the day, the way the morning sun painted streaks across the newly polished floorboards, the gentle glow of twilight filtering through the sheer bedroom curtains. These small observations, once overlooked in the haze of anxiety and distraction, now filled me with a quiet wonder, a renewed appreciation for the beauty in the mundane. My mornings became a ritual of intention. I would wake naturally with the rising sun, no longer relying on the jarring alarm that once signaled the start of another day to be endured. I'd make myself a cup of herbal tea, its warmth seeping into my hands, and sit by the window, watching the world awaken. I started a small journal, not to document grand events, but to capture the fleeting thoughts, the quiet insights, the subtle shifts in my emotional landscape. It was a space for gentle self-reflection, a way to acknowledge my feelings without judgment, to trace the contours of my evolving inner world. I rediscovered a love for gardening, a passion I had abandoned years ago when life became too overwhelming. I began with a small herb garden on the kitchen windowsill, watching the tiny sprouts emerge, a window testament to resilience and growth. Then I ventured outside, tending to the neglected flower beds, pulling out weeds with a surprising sense of satisfaction, turning the soil, planting vibrant annuals that promised a burst of color. The act of nurturing something living, of coaxing beauty from the earth, mirrored the nurturing I was finally extending to myself. The silence of the house, once oppressive and lonely, now felt like a comforting embrace. It was a space where I could hear my own thoughts, where ideas could germinate and flourish without interruption. I started to listen to music again, not just as background noise, but with focused attention, allowing the melodies to wash over me, to stir forgotten emotions, to evoke new sensations. I pulled out my old guitar, its strings dusty and neglected, and slowly, tentatively began to relearn the chords, my fingers clumsy at first, then gradually finding their rhythm. The imperfect notes were a metaphor for my own journey, a reminder that progress was a series of small, persistent efforts, not a sudden leap to perfection. Friends, curious about my recent quietude, eventually began to visit. Sarah, my oldest friend, came over one afternoon, her eyes widening as she stepped into the living room. She ran a hand over the soft fabric of the new throw pillows, her gaze lingering on the serene blue walls. "This is different," she said, her voice soft, laced with an unspoken understanding. "It's beautiful. It's so you." Her words were a balm, an affirmation that the changes I had made were not just superficial, but reflected a deeper truth she could instinctively recognize. We talked for hours, not about the past, but about the present, about the small joys I was discovering, the new routines I was building. I found myself sharing details I hadn't realized I was ready to articulate, speaking of the newfound peace, the clarity, the quiet strength that was blossoming within me. Sarah listened intently, her presence a comforting anchor. She didn't offer unsolicited advice or platitudes. She simply witnessed my transformation, her genuine happiness for me, evident in her warm smile and the light in her eyes. Another friend, Mark, known for his playful teasing, arrived with a bottle of wine and a skeptical grin, expecting the same old familiar chaos. He stopped dead in the doorway, his mouth slightly agape. "Who are you, and what have you done with my friend's house?" He joked, but there was a genuine note of surprise in his voice. He walked slowly through the living room, touching the new textures, admiring the subtle shifts in color. "Seriously, this is amazing," he finally said, his usual sarcasm replaced by genuine admiration. "It feels lighter, like a breath of fresh air." His observation struck a chord. Lighter. Yes, that was precisely it. The house, and by extension I, felt lighter, unburdened by the heavy weight of past expectations and disappointments. We sat in the newly transformed kitchen, sipping wine, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly present, truly at ease in my own home with my own company. These interactions, once a source of anxiety, now felt natural and effortless. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I was simply existing, openly and authentically. The fear of judgment, once a constant companion, had receded, replaced by a quiet confidence. I found myself engaging in deeper conversations, listening more intently, and speaking with a clarity that had been absent before. It was as if the internal decluttering had also cleared the channels of communication, allowing for more genuine connection. My professional life, too, began to reflect this internal shift. The work I had once approached with a sense of obligation now felt like an opportunity for creative expression. I found myself taking on projects that genuinely interested me, rather than those that simply paid the bills. My focus sharpened, my ideas flowed more freely, and I approached challenges with a newfound resilience. I realized that the stagnant energy that had permeated my personal life had also seeped into my professional endeavors, dulling my edge, stifling my potential. Now, with a renewed sense of purpose and a refreshed spirit, my work felt invigorated, meaningful. I started exploring new avenues for learning and growth. I enrolled in an online course on creative writing, something I had always dreamed of doing but never dared to pursue. The act of putting words on a page, of crafting stories and expressing ideas, felt exhilarating. It was another way to give voice to the experiences I had accumulated, to weave them into narratives that might resonate with others, or simply to understand them better myself. The feedback from my instructor and peers, while sometimes challenging, was always constructive, pushing me to delve deeper, to refine my craft, to trust my own voice. I also began to explore mindfulness practices. I downloaded an app for guided meditation, and though it felt awkward and foreign at first, I committed to a few minutes each day. Slowly, gradually, I started to feel the benefits. The constant chatter of my mind, once a relentless torrent of worries and regrets, began to quiet. I learned to observe my thoughts without getting entangled in them, to acknowledge my emotions without letting them overwhelm me. This practice, coupled with the physical changes in my environment, created a profound sense of inner calm, a steady core of peace that I could return to no matter what external circumstances arose. One crisp autumn morning, as I sat on my porch swing, sipping my tea and watching the leaves fall, a profound realization washed over me. The journey of transforming my home had been far more than a mere redecoration project. It had been a pilgrimage of self-discovery, a physical manifestation of my own healing process. Each brushstroke, each piece of furniture chosen, each plant nurtured, had been an act of reclaiming my space, my life, my very essence. The house was no longer just a red, the clearer it became. Mr. Henderson was in violation of several key provisions. He hadn't provided adequate notice for repairs, he was failing to maintain a habitable living space, and his rent increase felt retaliatory given my recent complaints. The next morning, I compiled all my documentation, the log of communications, the time-stamped photos of the damage, the copy of the rent increase notice. I wrote a formal letter to Mr. Henderson, certified mail, return receipt requested. In a calm, factual tone, I outlined all the outstanding issues, referenced the specific dates of my attempts to contact him, and cited the relevant sections of the Tenant-Landlord Code that he was in violation of. I respectfully informed him that I would be withholding a portion of my rent until the repairs were made, as allowed by law, and that I considered the rent increase invalid due to the existing conditions and his lack of response to repair requests. I also stated that I would be seeking legal counsel if the issues were not addressed promptly. It felt incredibly empowering to write that letter. It wasn't an emotional outburst. It was a strategic move, backed by facts and law. Sending that letter felt like crossing a threshold. I knew I was escalating the situation, but I also knew I couldn't just sit back and let him walk all over me. The return receipt came back a few days later, confirming he had received it. I braced myself for a response, expecting an angry phone call or an immediate repair crew. What I got instead was silence. A deafening, unsettling silence that lasted for another week. Then, a new notice appeared on my door. This one wasn't for a rent increase. This one was far more chilling. It was an eviction notice. A 3-day notice to quit for non-payment of rent, citing my partial rent payment as the justification. My heart pounded in my chest as I read it. He was playing hardball. He was trying to intimidate me. But I wasn't going to back down. This was exactly what I had prepared for, what the tenant rights articles had warned me about. This was landlord revenge. I immediately reached out to a local tenant rights organization I had found online during my research. I explained my entire situation to a wonderfully patient woman named Sarah. I laid out all the details, the initial move-in, the slow creep of neglect, the documented communications, the formal letter, and finally, the eviction notice. Sarah listened intently, taking notes, and then calmly told me that I had a very strong case. She explained that his eviction notice was likely retaliatory and legally unsound, especially given my documentation of his failures to maintain the property. She advised me not to panic, but to gather every single piece of evidence I had. Every email, every text message, every photo, every receipt, even my meticulously kept log. She stressed the importance of paper trails, of concrete proof, structure of wood and brick. It was a testament to resilience, a beacon of hope, a living embodiment of the person I was becoming. I thought back to the person I had been just a few months ago, lost, adrift, overwhelmed by the debris of a life that no longer served me. I remembered the heavy curtains, the bland walls, the clutter that mirrored the chaos within. Now I looked around at the vibrant, serene space I had created, and I felt a surge of gratitude, not just for the beauty of my surroundings, but for the strength I had found within myself to build it. The path had been arduous, marked by moments of doubt and despair, but each step had been a deliberate choice towards a brighter future. The future, once a nebulous, frightening concept, now felt like an open road, full of possibilities. I didn't have a grand master plan, no meticulously detailed blueprint for the years ahead. But I had something far more valuable, a deep sense of self-trust, an unwavering belief in my own capacity for growth and joy. I knew that challenges would still arise, that life would inevitably present its share of difficulties. But I also knew that I now possessed the tools, the inner resources, and the sanctuary of a home that truly reflected my spirit, to navigate whatever lay ahead. One day, while exploring a local art fair, something I would never have done in my previous state of mind, I stumbled upon a small booth filled with intricate pottery. A particular piece, a simple, unglazed ceramic vase with a subtle, organic texture, caught my eye. It was imperfect, yet beautiful, its raw form speaking volumes about authenticity and resilience. I bought it, not because I needed a vase, but because it resonated deeply with my current journey. It found its place on the reclaimed wooden console table in my living room, a silent symbol of the beauty found in imperfection, the strength in vulnerability. Later that week, a small notice appeared in my mailbox, an invitation to a neighborhood potluck. In the past, I would have immediately found an excuse to decline, retreating into the perceived safety of my solitude. But this time, a different impulse stirred within me. It wasn't a sense of obligation, but a genuine curiosity, a desire to connect, to share. I decided to bake a simple apple tart, using apples from a local orchard I had recently discovered during one of my new, meandering walks. The act of baking felt joyful, a contribution to a shared experience. When the evening arrived, I felt a flutter of nerves, but it was different from the paralyzing anxiety of old. It was an excited anticipation, a healthy tremor of stepping into the unknown. I carried my tart, so warm, to the community garden where the potluck was being held. The air was filled with laughter, the aroma of diverse foods, and the gentle hum of conversation. I recognized a few faces, neighbors I had only ever exchanged polite nods with. A woman with kind eyes and a warm smile approached me. "I haven't seen you around before," she said. "I'm Clara. Welcome." I introduced myself, feeling a warmth spread through me. We talked about the garden, about the changing seasons, about the simple pleasure of sharing a meal. Clara was a retired teacher, full of stories and a quiet wisdom. She spoke of her own journey of rediscovery after retirement, of finding new passions and connections. Her words resonated deeply, a testament to the universal human experience of evolution and growth. I found myself laughing, genuinely and freely, something that had felt foreign for so long. I shared anecdotes about my redecoration project, about the joy of tending my herb garden, about the unexpected pleasure of relearning the guitar. There was no pretense, no need to impress, just an honest exchange of experiences. As the evening drew to a close, and I walked home under a sky dusted with stars, a profound sense of belonging settled over me. It wasn't just the house that had become a sanctuary, it was my entire life, infused with intention, authenticity, and a renewed connection to the world around me. The journey was far from over, I knew that. Life was a continuous unfolding, a series of chapters yet to be written. But I was no longer a passive observer, waiting for life to happen to me. I was the author, the architect, the creator of my own narrative. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt truly, completely ready for whatever the next page might bring. The quiet declaration I had made within the walls of my home had expanded, reverberating outwards, touching every aspect of my existence. This was my life, lived on my terms, with an open heart and a spirit brimming with possibility. The scent of fresh paint had long faded, replaced by the fragrant mingling of herbs from my kitchen, the subtle perfume of blooming flowers from my garden, and the undeniable aroma of a life truly lived. The quiet declaration I had made within the walls of my home had expanded, reverberating outwards, touching every aspect of my existence. This was my life, lived on my terms, with an open heart and a spirit brimming with possibility. The scent of fresh paint had long faded, replaced by the fragrant mingling of herbs from my kitchen, the subtle perfume of blooming flowers from my garden, and the undeniable aroma of a life truly lived. The days that followed continued to unfold with a gentle rhythm, each sunrise a fresh invitation to engage with the world I had so carefully cultivated. My mornings began with the quiet ritual of tea, brewed strong and dark, sipped slowly as the first light painted the eastern sky. From my kitchen window I would watch the garden awaken, dew glistening on broad leaves, the first tentative buzz of a bee exploring a new blossom. There was a profound satisfaction in observing this miniature ecosystem, knowing I was not merely an observer, but an active participant, a steward. My hands had grown strong and calloused, a testament to the hours spent in the soil. The garden was no longer just a plot of land. It was a living canvas, a laboratory of growth and resilience. Each seed sown was an act of faith, each harvest a blessing. I learned to speak its language, to understand the subtle shifts in its needs, the silent demands of the seasons. The tomatoes ripened to a brilliant crimson, the lettuce unfurled its tender leaves, and the herbs offered their pungent perfumes, each a small victory against the encroaching wildness. Cooking became an act of devotion, transforming the garden's bounty into nourishing meals. My kitchen was a symphony of smells: garlic sizzling in olive oil, bread baking to a golden crust, the sweet tang of berries simmering for preserves. I experimented with old recipes, created new ones, and found joy in the simple alchemy of ingredients. There was no rush, no pressure, just the quiet pleasure of creation and the anticipation of sustenance. Every meal was a celebration, a direct connection from earth to plate, a tangible expression of gratitude. Beyond the physical labor and culinary pursuits, my mind found its own fertile ground. I read voraciously, old books and new, allowing stories and ideas to wash over me, enriching my internal landscape. I wrote too, not with any grand ambition, but as a way to process, to reflect, to capture the fleeting beauty of a moment, or the profound wisdom of a quiet thought. My journal became a trusted confidant, its pages filled with observations, dreams, and the evolving narrative of my self-discovery. The house itself felt alive, breathing with me. Its old timbers hummed with history, its windows framed the ever-changing landscape, and its hearth offered warmth and solace. I had filled it with things that held meaning: handmade pottery, woven textiles, faded photographs that whispered of forgotten lives. It was a space designed for contemplation, for comfort, for genuine living. There was no clutter of pretense, no echoes of a life I no longer wished to lead. Only authenticity. Sometimes, in the late afternoons, I would walk the winding paths of my property, past the ancient oak, down to the small stream that gurgled over smooth stones. The sounds of nature were my constant companions, the rustle of leaves, the chirping of crickets, the distant call of a hawk circling high above. These moments of solitude were not lonely. They were deeply enriching, allowing me to fully absorb the peace and beauty of my surroundings. I felt connected to something vast and ancient, a part of the grand tapestry of life. This deep immersion into my chosen existence brought a profound sense of self-reliance, not just in practical terms, but emotionally and spiritually. I no longer sought external validation or chased fleeting distractions. My happiness was an internal wellspring, constantly replenished by the simple acts of living with intention. The past, with its anxieties and uncertainties, felt like a distant shore, while the present was a vibrant, ever-unfolding landscape. Yet, as the seasons turned, I began to feel a gentle stirring, a quiet whisper from beyond the familiar confines of my sanctuary. It was not a desire to escape, but a subtle urge to extend, to share, to weave new threads into the rich tapestry I was creating. My connection to the world around me had deepened, and with it came a nascent curiosity about how that connection might manifest beyond my garden gate. One crisp autumn morning, while sorting through a pile of community flyers at the small general store in the nearby village, a particular notice caught my eye. It was for a community garden project, seeking volunteers to help revitalize an old, neglected plot of land on the edge of town. The flyer spoke of shared labor, shared harvests, and the creation of a green space for everyone. My heart gave a little lurch, a familiar pull towards the soil, but this time intertwined with a new possibility: connection with others. My initial reaction was a familiar flicker of hesitation. My sanctuary was so perfect, so complete. Would venturing out disrupt the delicate balance I had found? Would it open me up to the very things I had sought to escape? The complexities of human interaction, the potential for disappointment or misunderstanding? I paused, the flyer clutched in my hand, and took a deep breath. This was the old me talking, the one who retreated, who observed from a distance. The new me, the author of my own narrative, understood that growth often lay just beyond the edge of comfort. I spent the next few days contemplating the idea. I walked my garden, feeling the earth beneath my feet, seeking its quiet wisdom. I thought about the abundance it offered, not just in produce, but in lessons learned, in patience cultivated, in the sheer joy of creation. What if I could share that? Not just the fruits of my labor, but the spirit of it, the intentionality, the connection? The quiet declaration I had made within my home had been about living authentically. Could that authenticity extend to contributing to a larger community, without losing myself in the process? The answer, when it came, was a gentle affirmation. It was not a grand pronouncement, but a quiet knowing. My sanctuary was not a prison, it was a launching pad. My roots were deep, strong enough to allow me to reach out, to branch out, without fear of being uprooted. The community garden project felt like a natural extension of my own journey, an opportunity to cultivate not just plants, but relationships, to foster a shared sense of purpose. So one Tuesday morning, armed with my favorite trowel and a basket of freshly baked scones, I walked the short distance to the old plot of land. It was indeed neglected, overgrown with weeds, its soil compacted and weary. But even in its disarray, I saw potential, a canvas waiting for a loving hand. A small group of people were already there, some older, their faces etched with the wisdom of years, others younger, brimming with an eager, if sometimes clumsy, enthusiasm. I introduced myself, my voice a little rusty from days of quiet contemplation, but my smile genuine. There was a woman named Eleanor, with kind eyes and a laugh that crinkled the corners of her mouth, who seemed to be the unofficial leader. She greeted me warmly, her hands already covered in soil. Another man, stout and quiet, named Arthur, nodded a welcome. A younger couple, Liam and Chloe, were energetically tackling a particularly stubborn patch of nettles. The work was hard, physical labor, but it was satisfying. We dug, we weeded, we turned the soil, our conversations flowing easily around the rhythm of our efforts. There was no pretense, no small talk for the sake of it, just genuine exchanges about the land, about plants, about shared hopes for this patch of earth. I found myself sharing tips on soil enrichment, on companion planting, on the best way to coax life from reluctant seeds. And in turn, I learned from them Eleanor's knowledge of local wildflowers, Arthur's practical solutions for irrigation, Liam and Chloe's infectious optimism. The community garden became a new kind of sanctuary, a shared one. It was different from my private haven, more boisterous, more collaborative, but no less intentional. Here the aroma of a life truly lived, mingled with the scent of freshly turned earth, the sweet perfume of budding hope, and the occasional waft of Eleanor's strong coffee. I discovered that sharing my passion did not diminish it, it amplified it, reflecting back to me the joy and purpose I had found. Over the weeks and months, the plot transformed. Rows of neat beds emerged from the chaos, filled with young seedlings reaching for the sun. A small shed was repaired, a water butt installed. We celebrated small victories, the first sprout, the first flower, the first ripe berry. There were occasional setbacks, too, a late frost, a persistent pest, but we faced them together, pooling our knowledge and our resilience. My involvement in the community garden began to ripple outwards into other aspects of my life. I started bringing surplus vegetables from my own garden to share with Eleanor and Arthur, who in turn shared their homemade jams or knitted scarves. The isolation I had once embraced for its necessity in my healing now gently receded, replaced by a comfortable, organic sense of belonging. I found myself looking forward to Tuesdays and Thursdays, the designated garden days, with a quiet eagerness. I realized that the renewed connection to the world around me was not just about nature, but about people too. It was about finding my place within a larger ecosystem, contributing my unique gifts, and receiving the gifts of others. My interactions were no longer superficial or draining. They were meaningful, rooted in shared purpose and mutual respect. I was still the author of my own narrative, but now that narrative included a few more well-loved characters, a few more interwoven storylines. One particularly warm afternoon, as we sat under the shade of a newly planted apple tree, sharing a flask of iced tea, Eleanor turned to me. "You have a way with the earth," she observed, her eyes twinkling. "A real green thumb, but more than that. You listen to it." I felt a warmth spread through me, a recognition that went deeper than simple praise. She saw not just my skill, but the intention behind it, the authenticity that had become the cornerstone of my life. I smiled, acknowledging her words. "I've learned to," I replied. "It took a long time, but I've learned to listen to many things I ignored before." Arthur, usually a man of few words, grunted in agreement. "It's good to have someone like you here. Reminds us what's possible, even with old dirt." His words, simple as they were, resonated deeply. I was not just tending a garden, I was tending a spirit, both my own and perhaps a little of the community's. The sanctuary of my home remained my anchor, my place of deep replenishment. But now, when I returned from the community garden, tired but invigorated, the quiet walls seemed to hum with a different kind of energy. The fragrant mingling of herbs from my kitchen, the subtle perfume of blooming flowers from my garden, now carried a new note. The earthy scent of shared labor, the sweet whisper of camaraderie, the undeniable aroma of a life truly lived and truly shared. My journey was indeed far from over, but the path ahead felt clearer, brighter. I was still the author, the architect, the creator, but my canvas had expanded, my materials enriched. I was no longer just building a life for myself. I was helping to cultivate a small corner of the world, nurturing growth wherever I found it, within myself and around me. The next page, I realized, was not just about what I would write, but about the stories we would create together, woven into the rich soil of shared experience. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt truly, completely ready for that collaborative unfolding. The seasons continued their relentless, beautiful cycle. Spring brought the vibrant green of new growth, summer the abundant warmth and the buzzing symphony of insects, autumn the rich hues of harvest and the promise of rest. Winter, far from being a time of desolation, became a period of quiet reflection, of planning, of tending to the indoor life. I learned to embrace each season, not just as a change in weather, but as a phase of life, each with its own lessons and its own unique beauty. My own garden flourished, yielding more than I could possibly consume. This abundance became another avenue for connection. I began to set up a small, informal stand at the end of my driveway, offering surplus vegetables and herbs to passers-by, often simply for the joy of sharing. Sometimes, people left small tokens in return: a jar of homemade jam, a hand-knitted dishcloth, a simple thank you note. These anonymous exchanges, devoid of commercial transaction, felt profoundly human, reinforcing the web of generosity that I was slowly discovering existed in the world. I also found myself drawn to other quiet pursuits that mirrored the intentionality of my gardening. I learned to spin wool, transforming raw fleece into soft, usable yarn. The repetitive motion of the spinning wheel was meditative, a rhythmic hum that settled my thoughts and connected me to ancient traditions. I began to knit and crochet, creating blankets and scarves that held the warmth of my hands and the quiet peace of my home. These crafts were not about production or profit, but about the joy of creation, the satisfaction of making something beautiful and useful with my own two hands. My writing evolved too. It moved beyond a personal journal, though that practice continued, into more structured forms. I began to write short essays, reflections on nature, on simple living, on the profound wisdom found in the everyday. I even started a small, anonymous online blog, a quiet corner of the internet where I could share my thoughts and experiences, hoping they might resonate with others seeking a similar path. The response was often surprising, small comments from strangers in distant lands, confirming that the yearning for authenticity and connection was universal. It was a gentle way to reach out, to contribute to a larger conversation, without sacrificing the solitude I cherished. My connection with Eleanor and Arthur from the community garden deepened. Eleanor, it turned out, was a retired school teacher with a passion for local history. She would often share stories of the village, tales of generations past who had worked these very lands, stories that imbued the soil beneath my feet with even greater meaning. Arthur, a former carpenter, helped me with a few small repairs around my house, his quiet competence a comforting presence. In return, I would often share a meal with them, my kitchen filled with the warmth of good food and easy conversation. These friendships, forged in the earth and nurtured with shared purpose, felt genuine and sustaining. The younger couple, Liam and Chloe, discovered my little driveway stand and became regular visitors, often exchanging their own homemade sourdough bread for my fresh herbs. They were artists, just starting out, and their enthusiasm for life, their belief in the power of creativity, was infectious. We would often sit on my porch, sipping tea, talking about the challenges and joys of living a life driven by passion rather than expectation. They reminded me of the younger version of myself, the one who had yearned for meaning but hadn't yet found the courage to claim it. One crisp autumn evening, as the leaves turned to fiery hues and the air grew sharp with the scent of wood smoke, I found myself sitting by my hearth, a hand-knitted blanket draped over my lap, a steaming mug of herbal tea warming my hands. The house was quiet, filled only with the crackle of the fire and the gentle ticking of an old clock. I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment, to this profound sense of peace and contentment. It had been a journey of shedding, of letting go of what no longer served me, of stripping away the layers of societal expectation and external validation. But it had also been a journey of building, of cultivating, of intentionally creating a life that resonated with my deepest values. The sanctuary I had built was not just a physical space. It was a state of being, a way of engaging with the world. I was no longer just the author, the architect, the creator of my own narrative. I was also a gardener, a weaver, a storyteller, a friend, a neighbor, a participant in the intricate dance of life. My roots were deep, my branches reaching out. My roots were deep, my branches reaching out, not in an effort to grasp or control, but to connect, to offer shade, to bear fruit. The earth beneath my home, the very soil I tended in my garden, felt like an extension of my own being. It was a rich, dark loam, fragrant with the promise of life, teeming with unseen activity. Every spring, as the first tender shoots pushed through the thawing ground, I felt a resurgence of energy within myself, a mirror of the earth's awakening. The cycle of planting, nurturing, harvesting, and resting had become my own rhythm, a sacred dance that grounded me in the present moment. The garden was more than just a source of sustenance. It was a living canvas, a laboratory of patience and observation. I learned the subtle language of the plants, understanding when they thirsted, when they yearned for sun, when they struggled against an unseen pest. It taught me about resilience, about the quiet strength. that allowed a fragile seedling to push through compacted soil, or a gnarled old oak to weather a century of storms, its roots clinging fiercely to the earth even as its topmost branches wrestled with the fiercest gales. It was a lesson in enduring, not just surviving, but thriving in the face of adversity, a quiet defiance against the harsh edges of existence. This strength was not born of aggression or conquest, but of adaptability, of bending rather than breaking, of finding nourishment even in scarcity. I saw it in the tenacity of a wildflower blooming in a crack in the stone path, in the persistent green of moss reclaiming forgotten surfaces, in the slow, inexorable turning of the seasons that always brought renewal after dormancy. My own life, too, had been a series of seasons, some barren, some bountiful, some tempestuous, some serene. The garden, in its quiet wisdom, had become a metaphor for my own journey, a living testament to the cycles of growth and decay, of loss and rebirth. It had shown me that every ending was merely a prelude to a new beginning, that even in the deepest winter, the promise of spring lay dormant beneath the frozen earth. This understanding had brought a profound peace, a sense of belonging to something far vaster and more enduring than my individual self. My anxieties, once like tangled weeds, had gradually been untangled, plucked out, and composted, transforming into the rich soil of acceptance and gratitude. The rhythm of the earth was my clock, my calendar, my guide. The sun's trajectory across the sky dictated my waking and sleeping. The moon's phases influenced my planting and harvesting. The wind's whispers carried the scent of rain or the promise of clear skies. I had shed the artificial constructs of time, the hurried urgency of deadlines and appointments, embracing instead a slower, more deliberate pace. There was no rush in the garden, only patience, only observation, only the gentle unfolding of life. To try and force growth was to invite failure. To listen, to respond, to cooperate with nature's inherent wisdom was to cultivate abundance. This philosophy had permeated every aspect of my existence, transforming my home into a sanctuary of mindful living, my days into a tapestry woven with intention and presence. My hands, once accustomed to the sterile touch of keyboards and the smooth glide of pens across paper, had grown calloused and strong, imbued with the earthy wisdom of the soil. They knew the difference between a healthy root and a diseased one, the precise pressure needed to transplant a delicate seedling, the satisfying weight of a ripe tomato. Each furrow I dug, each seed I sowed, each weed I pulled was an act of communion, a silent conversation with the living world. The soil was never just dirt. It was a vibrant ecosystem, a complex web of life that sustained and nourished. I had learned to respect its delicate balance, to replenish what I took, to nurture its health as I would my own. Beyond the garden, the forest that bordered my property was another teacher, another source of profound connection. Its ancient trees, towering sentinels of time, held stories whispered on the wind, etched into their bark, woven into the intricate network of their roots. I often walked among them, my footsteps softened by layers of fallen leaves, the air thick with the scent of pine needles and damp earth. In the dappled sunlight filtering through the canopy, I felt a sense of timelessness, of being part of an unbroken lineage of life. The forest taught me about interdependence, how every creature, from the smallest insect to the largest deer, played a vital role in the intricate dance of the ecosystem. It taught me about stillness, about the profound wisdom found in quiet observation and simply being. My home, a modest cottage nestled amidst the greenery, was an extension of this philosophy. It was built with natural materials, its walls breathing, its windows framing views of the changing seasons. The interior was simple, uncluttered, filled with objects that held meaning, a handcrafted wooden bowl, a collection of smooth river stones, dried herbs hanging from the rafters, books worn soft with repeated reading. There was no television, no constant hum of electronic devices, only the gentle sounds of the house settling, the crackle of the fire in winter, the chirping of crickets in summer. Light was provided by the sun during the day, by oil lamps and candles at night, casting warm, dancing shadows that invited introspection and quiet contemplation. This deliberate minimalism was not a form of deprivation, but a choice for richness, for a life unburdened by excess, focused on the essential. The kitchen, in particular, was the heart of the home, a place of alchemy and nourishment. Here, the bounty of the garden was transformed into meals that were both simple and deeply satisfying. The aroma of freshly baked bread, of simmering stews, of herbs drying on the windowsill, filled the air with comforting warmth. Cooking was another form of meditation, a mindful act of creation, a celebration of the earth's generosity. I knew the provenance of every ingredient, had nurtured it from seed to harvest, and this intimate connection imbued each meal with a special significance. Eating became an act of gratitude, a conscious acknowledgement of the intricate web of life that sustained me. Solitude, for many, was a state to be avoided, a void to be filled. For me, it had become a cherished companion, a fertile ground for self-discovery. In the absence of constant external stimulation, my inner world had blossomed. I learned to listen to the whispers of my own thoughts, to explore the landscape of my emotions, to confront my fears, and embrace my joys without judgment. This deep introspection had led to a profound understanding of myself, a clarity of purpose that had once eluded me in the noisy clamor of the outside world. I was never truly alone, for I was always in conversation with the earth, with the plants, with the animals, and with the quiet wisdom that resided within my own being. My solitude was not isolation, it was a chosen communion. The passage of years had etched lines on my face, silvered my hair, and perhaps slowed my gait a fraction, but it had also deepened my gaze and enriched my spirit. I carried my age not as a burden, but as a badge of honor, a testament to the myriad experiences that had shaped me. Each wrinkle told a story, each ache a memory of effort and resilience. I had shed the vanity of youth. Her words were a lifeline. I wasn't alone in this. There were people, organizations, laws designed to protect tenants from exactly this kind of exploitation. The fear that had initially gripped me when I saw the eviction notice began to recede, replaced by a steely resolve. This wasn't just about my apartment anymore, it was about standing up for what was right. It was about principle. I spent the next few days organizing everything. I created a dedicated folder on my computer, meticulously categorizing every piece of digital evidence. I printed out all emails and text message exchanges, making sure to include timestamps. I compiled a chronological binder of all my printed documents, from the initial lease agreement to the certified mail receipt for my formal letter, and of course, the eviction notice itself. It was a thick stack, a testament to the months of neglect and my diligent efforts to document it. Each page was a piece of the puzzle, a step in the unfolding drama. My apartment, which had once felt like a sanctuary, now felt like a battleground. But it also felt like a headquarters, a place where I was strategizing, preparing for what I knew would be a difficult fight. I knew Mr. Henderson was counting on me to be intimidated, to simply move out quietly. He was counting on me to not know my rights, or to be too afraid to assert them. But he had severely underestimated me. I wasn't just a tenant anymore. I was a determined advocate for my own rights, armed with information and a growing stack of undeniable evidence. Sarah from the Tenant Rights Organization connected me with a pro bono lawyer, a kind but firm woman named Emily, who specialized in housing law. Meeting her felt like gaining a powerful ally. I brought my binder, my laptop, my entire meticulously organized collection of evidence. Emily went through everything, nodding occasionally, her expression unreadable but attentive. When I finished recounting the story, from the leaky faucet to the eviction notice, she leaned back in her chair and gave me a small, reassuring smile. She confirmed what Sarah had said. We had a very strong case. Emily explained the legal process to me, step by step. She talked about responding to the eviction notice, filing a formal complaint with the housing authority, and potentially taking Mr. Henderson to court. She explained the concept of retaliatory eviction and how my documentation would be crucial in proving it. She also advised me on how to handle any further communication from Mr. Henderson, emphasizing that all contact should now be through her office. It was a lot to take in, but having a clear roadmap and a professional guiding me made all the difference. The uncertainty began to dissipate, replaced by a sense of purpose. The next few weeks were a blur of legal preparations. Emily drafted a formal response to the eviction notice, clearly stating my intention to fight it, and outlining Mr. Knott's, embracing instead the authentic beauty of a life lived fully and consciously. There was a quiet power in this acceptance, a liberation from the endless striving for an elusive ideal. My body was a vessel, a temporary dwelling, but my spirit, connected to the timeless cycles of nature, felt eternal. I had come to understand that true wealth was not measured in possessions or power, but in the richness of one's inner life, in the depth of one's connections, in the simple joy of being. My life was abundant, not because I had much, but because I needed little. This realization had been a gradual unfolding, a shedding of layers of societal conditioning, a return to a more primal, more authentic way of living. I had chosen a path less traveled, not out of rebellion, but out of a deep yearning for harmony, for a life aligned with the natural order of things. The garden continued to be my greatest teacher, its lessons unfolding with each passing season. In spring, it taught me about hope and new beginnings, the sheer exuberance of life bursting forth after dormancy, the delicate unfurling of new leaves, the vibrant hues of early blossoms, the sweet scent of fresh earth, all spoke of renewal, of the endless potential for growth. I spent hours observing the busy bees, the darting butterflies, the tiny insects awakening from their winter slumber, each playing its part in the grand symphony of life. There was a joyful urgency in spring, a palpable energy that infused me with a renewed sense of purpose. Summer brought abundance and generosity. The garden teemed with life, its bounty overflowing. Tomatoes ripened on the vine, beans climbed their trellises with vigorous abandon, herbs perfumed the air with their potent essences. This was a time of diligent work, of harvesting, preserving, and sharing. The warmth of the sun on my skin, the long, languid days, the symphony of cicadas at dusk. These were the sensory delights of summer. It taught me about the rewards of labor, about the satisfaction of providing for oneself and for others, about the simple pleasure of a meal shared under the open sky. The Earth's generosity during this season was a powerful reminder of the interconnectedness of all things, of the endless cycle of giving and receiving. Autumn, with its golden light and crisp air, brought a different kind of beauty, a poignant farewell. The leaves turned brilliant hues of red, orange, and gold before gracefully letting go, returning their nutrients to the earth. The harvest was gathered, the last fruits plucked, and the garden began its slow descent into dormancy. This season taught me about release, about the wisdom of letting go, of embracing the natural process of decay and transformation. There was a melancholic beauty in autumn, a sense of quiet reflection as the world prepared for its winter sleep. I would spend hours raking leaves, composting spent plants, preparing the beds for the next cycle, a ritual of reverence for the earth's enduring wisdom. Winter, often perceived as a time of barrenness, held its own profound lessons. The garden lay dormant, covered in a blanket of snow, seemingly lifeless. Yet, beneath the frozen surface, life persisted, patiently waiting for the return of warmth. Winter was a time for introspection, for rest, for gathering inner resources. I would spend more time indoors, reading, mending, planning for the coming spring. The silence of winter, broken only by the crackle of the fire or the hoot of an owl, was a balm for the soul, an invitation to delve deeper into the quiet corners of my own being. It taught me about resilience and stillness, about the hidden strength that lies beneath the surface, waiting for its moment to emerge. Each season, in its unique way, contributed to my understanding of the world and of myself. They were not merely meteorological events, but profound spiritual teachers, guiding me through the grand narrative of existence. My life had become a seamless integration with these cycles, my inner landscape mirroring the outer world. I had found my place in the grand tapestry of life, not as an observer, but as an active participant, a steward of the small patch of earth entrusted to my care. The sense of belonging was absolute, a deep-seated knowing that I was exactly where I was meant to be, doing exactly what I was meant to do. This journey had not been without its challenges, its moments of doubt or struggle, but each obstacle had ultimately served as a stepping stone, deepening my resolve and refining my understanding. The lessons learned from a stubborn weed, a failed crop, a sudden storm, were just as valuable as the triumphs. They taught me humility, patience, and the importance of adapting to circumstances beyond my control. There was a profound freedom in relinquishing the need for absolute control, in trusting the inherent wisdom of nature to guide the way. My hands, though weathered, still moved with purpose, shaping the earth, tending to life. My eyes, though lined, still saw the intricate beauty in a dewdrop on a spider's web, the vibrant hues of a sunset, the subtle shift in the light that heralded a change in weather. My ears, though perhaps less acute for distant sounds, were finely attuned to the rustle of leaves, the song of a bird, the gentle hum of insects. My senses had become refined, awakened to the myriad wonders that surrounded me, wonders often overlooked in the rush of modern life. The concept of time itself had transformed. It no longer felt linear, a relentless march forward, but cyclical, spiraling, an eternal return. The past was present in the ancient trees, the future in the seeds I sowed, and the present moment was a vibrant intersection of both. There was a profound comfort in this understanding, a release from the anxiety of what was to come or the regret of what had been. All that truly mattered was this breath, this moment, this connection to the living earth. I sometimes wondered about the world beyond my quiet haven, the ceaseless churn of progress and change that continued unabated. I knew it existed, a distant hum on the edge of my awareness, but it felt increasingly irrelevant to the profound truths I discovered daily in my garden and in the forest. My chosen path was not a rejection of humanity, but a re-engagement with a more fundamental humanity, one rooted in connection to the earth, to self, to the essential rhythms of life. It was a quieter, perhaps less dramatic, but infinitely richer existence. My legacy, if one could call it that, would not be found in grand achievements or public recognition, but in the health of the soil I tended, the flourishing of the life I nurtured, the quiet wisdom I accumulated. It would be in the enduring vibrancy of the garden, a testament to a life lived in harmony with the earth. This was enough, more than enough. It was everything. The air in my cottage carried the scent of wood smoke and dried herbs, a comforting aroma that was as much a part of me as my own breath. The old wooden floors creaked companionably beneath my feet, each sound a familiar whisper from the past. The light from the single oil lamp cast a warm glow across the well-worn pages of my journal, where I often transcribed my observations, my reflections, my gratitude. These journals were not meant for anyone else's eyes, but served as a dialogue with myself, a record of a life lived deliberately, mindfully, and in profound communion with the natural world. They charted the subtle shifts in my understanding, the deepening of my connection, the continuous unfolding of wisdom that came from simply paying attention. I had learned that true knowledge was not acquired through endless accumulation of facts, but through direct experience, through the quiet process of observation and intuition. The garden was my library, the forest my university, and the changing seasons my curriculum. Each day brought a new lesson, a fresh perspective, a deeper appreciation for the intricate dance of life. There was no end to learning, no final destination, only a continuous journey of discovery. And in this journey, I had found a profound and enduring sense of purpose, a deep wellspring of contentment that nourished my spirit and sustained my days. The concept of home had expanded far beyond the walls of my cottage. It encompassed the garden, the forest, the very air I breathed, the ground beneath my feet. It was a state of being, a feeling of belonging, a deep-seated connection to the pulse of the earth. I was not just living on the land. I was a part of it, woven into its fabric, my roots intertwining with the roots of the ancient trees, my breath mingling with the breath of the wind. This sense of oneness was the ultimate liberation, a release from the illusion of separation, a return to the fundamental truth of interconnectedness. My hands, resting now on the rough-hewn table, bore the marks of my life, scars from thorns, stains from rich earth, the subtle tremor that came with age. They were beautiful hands, hands that had worked, created, nurtured, and loved. They were hands that understood the language of the earth, the silent wisdom of growth and decay. And as I looked at them, I saw not just my own history, but the history of all life, the continuous cycle of creation and transformation played out in the microcosm of my own existence. This was my solace, my strength, my enduring truth, the quiet hum of the night, the distant hoot of an owl, the gentle rustle of leaves outside my window. These were the lullabies that soothed me to sleep. There was no fear in the darkness, only peace, only the profound sense of being held within the vast, benevolent embrace of the natural world. My dreams were often filled with images of the garden, of growing things, of light filtering through leaves, a testament to the deep imprint of my days on my subconscious. I slept soundly, knowing that the earth continued its silent work, that life persisted even in repose, and that with the dawn, another opportunity would arise to witness its unfolding beauty. And so, The sacred dance continued, a rhythm as old as time itself, a melody that resonated deep within my soul. I was a part of it, a single note in its grand composition, and in that understanding I found everything I had ever sought: peace, purpose, and a profound, unwavering connection to the beating heart of the world. My life was a living prayer, a silent hymn of gratitude offered to the earth, the ultimate source of all sustenance, all wisdom, all enduring beauty. This was my sanctuary, my school, my temple, my home. This was my life fully lived. The years unfolded with the same gentle rhythm, each season bringing new lessons, new wonders to behold. My steps grew a little slower, my hands a little more gnarled, but my heart remained as open and receptive as the sky above my garden. I watched the saplings I had planted mature into sturdy trees, their branches reaching skyward, offering shade and shelter to new generations of creatures. I saw the cycle of birth, growth, decay, and renewal play out countless times, a constant affirmation of life's eternal promise. There came a day, bathed in the soft, golden light of late autumn, when I felt a deeper merging than ever before. The air was crisp, scented with fallen leaves and damp earth, and the garden hummed with a quiet, contented energy. I sat beneath the ancient oak, its roots deep in the soil that had nurtured me for so long, and simply breathed. My senses, though dulled by time, were acutely aware of every rustle, every scent, every shift in the light. I felt the earth's steady pulse beneath me, the gentle current of life flowing through all things. There was no fear, only a profound sense of homecoming. My individual form, a temporary vessel, began to soften at its edges, dissolving into the vibrant tapestry of the world around me. My breath became one with the whisper of the wind through the leaves. My heart beat with the rhythmic murmur of the stream that wound through my sanctuary. I was no longer merely observing the dance. I was becoming the dance itself, a seamless part of the grand, unending choreography. The garden continued to thrive, a living testament to the love and reverence poured into its soil. It became a silent sermon, a place where the enduring beauty and wisdom of the earth spoke volumes to all who would listen. My essence, unbound by flesh, permeated the very light that filtered through the canopy, the warmth of the sun on a budding leaf, the cool embrace of the rich, dark soil. I was in the buzzing of the bees, the song of the birds, the silent growth of every root and stem. The cycle was complete, yet endlessly beginning. In that boundless continuation, in that absolute integration with the beating heart of the world, I found not an end, but an eternal. Henderson's breaches of the lease and tenant laws, we sent it via certified mail, just like I had done with my own letter. We also filed a complaint with the city's housing department, detailing the uninhabitable conditions and his failure to make repairs. This wasn't just a private dispute anymore. It was becoming a public record. Meanwhile, Mr. Henderson, true to his character, continued his silence. He didn't respond to Emily's letter, nor did he make any attempt to fix the issues in my apartment. The ceiling stain grew larger, the cold persisted, and the faucet continued its rhythmic plink. It was as if he believed that by ignoring the problem, it would simply vanish. But it wasn't vanishing. It was building, layer by layer, into an undeniable mountain of evidence against him. One afternoon, I received a phone call from an unknown number. It was Mr. Henderson. His voice, usually so affable, was now strained and laced with thinly veiled anger. He demanded to know why I had involved lawyers. He said I was making a big mistake, that I was just causing trouble for myself. He suggested that if I just paid the full rent and dropped all these complaints, we could go back to how things were. He even subtly threatened that things would get much worse for me if I didn't comply. I calmly informed him that all communication would need to go through my lawyer, Emily. I repeated it firmly, then ended the call. My hand was shaking slightly, but I felt a surge of triumph. I hadn't given in. I hadn't let him intimidate me. I had held my ground. I immediately called Emily and recounted the conversation, providing her with the exact details of his threats. She assured me that his call only strengthened our case, further demonstrating his retaliatory intent. The legal wheels were now in motion. I knew this wouldn't be a quick or easy fight. It would require patience, resilience, and a continued commitment to documenting every single interaction, every development. But I was ready. I was no longer just a tenant living in an uncomfortable apartment. I was a determined individual fighting for my rights, and in doing so, I felt like I was fighting for every tenant who had ever been exploited by an unjust landlord. This wasn't just my story anymore. It was a testament to the power of knowing your rights and having the courage to stand up for them. The battle had truly begun, and I was ready for whatever came next. Every day brought a new challenge, a new piece of the puzzle, and another opportunity to strengthen my resolve. I learned to look at every interaction, every piece of mail, every phone call, as potential evidence. My phone became an extension of my legal strategy, always ready to snap a photo or record an important detail. The housing department's investigation began with a formal inspection of my apartment. An inspector, a serious woman, with a clipboard, arrived a few days after our complaint was filed. She meticulously documented every issue I had reported: the water-damaged ceiling, the persistent cold, the leaky faucet, the general state of disrepair. She took her own photos, made detailed notes, and even used a thermometer to record the low indoor temperature. It was incredibly validating to have an official body confirm what I had been experiencing for months. Her findings would be a powerful piece of evidence in our favor. Mr. Henderson, predictably, tried to deny everything to the inspector, claiming I was exaggerating, that these were minor issues, or that I had caused some of the damage myself. But the inspector had my documented history, my time-stamped photos, and her own objective assessment. His denials fell flat. She issued a formal notice of violation to him, ordering him to make the necessary repairs within a strict time frame, usually 30 days. Failure to comply would result in fines and further legal action from the city. This was a significant victory, the first official confirmation of his negligence. The eviction case itself was moving forward in parallel. Emily filed a motion to dismiss his eviction notice, arguing that it was retaliatory and lacked legal basis due to the ongoing habitability issues. She presented all our evidence: my initial complaints, his lack of response, the rent increase notice, my formal letter with the partial rent payment justification, his threatening phone call. That call, a chilling monologue of rage and intimidation, had come late one evening, just days after I sent the partial rent payment and formal letter. His voice, usually a practiced veneer of false pleasantry, was raw with fury. He accused me of being a cheat, a liar, a troublemaker, and a manipulator. He swore he would make my life a living hell, that he would see me on the streets, that I would never rent again in this city. He boasted about his connections, his money, and his ability to crush anyone who dared to stand up to him. He said I had no idea who I was dealing with, that I had made a grave mistake. He ended by saying he would ensure I regretted every single penny I had withheld. I had been prepared, though my hands still trembled as I held the phone. Emily had advised me to record any conversations if possible, but failing that, to take meticulous notes immediately afterward. I had done exactly that. My hand, despite its tremor, had scribbled furiously onto the notepad beside my landline. Date, time, specific phrases, threats, the raw venom in his voice. Every accusation, every boast, every promise of ruin was meticulously recorded. I wrote until the anger and fear subsided enough for me to breathe, until the details were etched not just on paper but in my mind. The silence in the apartment after I hung up was deafening, a stark contrast to the storm that had just raged through the phone line. I sat there for a long time, the cold receiver still clutched in my hand, staring at the wall. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror and defiance. He had meant every word. That much was clear. This was not an empty threat from a frustrated man. This was a declaration of war from someone who felt entitled to unquestioning obedience and absolute power. His confidence, his casual mention of connections and money, painted a chilling picture of an adversary who believed himself untouchable. For a moment, a wave of despair washed over me. What hope did I, a single tenant with limited resources, have against such a force? The image of myself on the streets, of never finding another home, flashed before my eyes, cold and stark. But then, the fear began to morph into something else. Righteous anger. He had called me a cheat, a liar, a troublemaker. He had tried to strip me of my dignity, to make me feel small and insignificant. And in doing so, he had ignited a spark within me that I hadn't known was there. I was not a cheat. I was a tenant demanding my rights to a safe and habitable home. I was not a liar. I had presented facts, documented evidence. I was not a troublemaker. I was a person standing up for myself. His words, intended to crush me, had instead solidified my resolve. The next morning, with the first light of dawn, I called Emily. Her voice was calm, steady, a balm to my still frayed nerves. I recounted the call, reading directly from my notes, my voice catching only a few times. She listened patiently, interjecting only with an occasional hum of understanding. "That is exactly what we expected," she said when I finished. "It confirms his character and his intent. You did perfectly by documenting everything. This is crucial evidence of harassment and retaliation." Her words were a lifeline. They validated my fear but also my actions. We talked for an hour, mapping out the next steps. Emily reiterated her previous advice. Do not engage with him directly, no matter what he says or does. All communication must go through her. Keep documenting every interaction, every notice, every perceived act of harassment, no matter how small. Take photos, record dates and times. Write down what happened immediately. He will try to intimidate you, she warned. He will try to scare you into giving up. He might send official-looking letters that are meaningless, or even try to serve you with an eviction notice. Do not panic. Bring everything to me. We have a strong case, but it requires your vigilance and your courage. Her mention of courage resonated deeply. I was scared, but I was also determined. My home, my sanctuary, had become a battleground, and I was not going to surrender it without a fight. The landlord wasted no time in making good on his threats. The first volley came, 2 days later, not with a phone call, but with a physical manifestation of his presence. I heard a loud, insistent knocking on my door around midday. I was working from home that day, and my heart immediately leaped into my throat. I knew it was him. I had not given him permission to enter, nor had he provided the legally required 24-hour notice for entry. I crept to the peephole. Sure enough, his imposing figure filled the frame, his face a mask of barely contained fury. He hammered on the door again, louder this time, calling my name, his voice muffled but clearly audible through the thick wood. I held my breath, my mind racing. Emily's words echoed. Do not engage. I stood perfectly still, trying to project an absence, hoping he would think I wasn't home. He rattled the doorknob, then pounded again, demanding to be let in, demanding to discuss the rent. His voice grew louder, more aggressive. I pulled out my phone, my hands shaking, and began recording audio. I aimed the camera at the door, trying to capture the sound and the movement, though the peephole view was limited. He spent a solid 5 minutes attempting to breach my door, his threats escalating from demands to veiled warnings about what would happen if I continued to ignore him. Finally, with a frustrated growl, I heard his heavy footsteps retreat down the hallway. As soon as the building door clicked shut, signifying his departure, I rushed to my notepad. Date, time, description of the incident, his words. Illegal entry attempt, harassment. I emailed Emily immediately, attaching the audio and a brief summary. She responded quickly, praising my quick thinking and advising me to install a security camera, even a cheap indoor one pointed at the door, if possible. The incidents began to multiply. A week later, a formal-looking envelope arrived, a notice to pay rent or quit. It demanded the full amount of rent, including the portion I had withheld for repairs plus a late fee, within 3 days. It was a thinly veiled attempt to strong-arm me. I immediately forwarded it to Emily. She confirmed it was a standard legal maneuver, but that our response, already prepared, would counter it effectively. We were not quitting, and we were not paying until the repairs were made. Then came the more insidious tactics. Minor annoyances, designed to chip away at my peace of mind. The hallway light outside my apartment, which had been working perfectly, mysteriously went out and stayed out for days, plunging my immediate entryway into darkness. The garbage chute on my floor, usually cleared daily, began to overflow, attracting pests. I documented everything with photos and timestamps, sending them to Emily. Was he doing these things himself? Or was he instructing the building manager, who was clearly under his thumb, to make my life difficult? It was impossible to prove directly, but the pattern was undeniable. The worst was the feeling of constant surveillance. I started noticing his car parked across the street more often, sometimes with him inside, sometimes not. I would catch glimpses of him in the lobby, or hear his distinct voice echoing from another floor, always around times I was coming or going. He never approached me directly after that first door-pounding incident, but his presence was a heavy, suffocating blanket. It felt like a game of cat and mouse, and I was the mouse, constantly looking over my shoulder. Sleep became elusive, punctuated by nightmares of eviction notices and his enraged face. My appetite dwindled. The joy I once found in my apartment, in my small corner of the city, was replaced by a gnawing anxiety. Emily, however, remained steadfast. She guided me through the process of officially responding to his notice to pay or quit, filing a formal dispute that reiterated my right to withhold rent due to uninhabitable conditions, citing specific sections of tenant law, and attaching all the evidence we had gathered. She also advised me to send another certified letter directly to him, informing him that any further attempts at unannounced entry or harassment would be considered a breach of my tenant rights and would be met with legal action. It felt empowering to send those letters, to stand my ground on paper, even as my knees still trembled. The legal battle truly began when I received the summons, an unlawful detainer lawsuit, his formal attempt to evict me. This was it, the moment I had both dreaded and prepared for. The official document felt heavy in my hands, its legalese dense and intimidating. It listed me as the defendant, him as the plaintiff, and accused me of breach of contract, non-payment of rent, and other fabricated offenses. My first instinct was panic. Court. A judge. The possibility of losing my home, of having an eviction on my record that would haunt me for years. But then I remembered Emily's calm voice, her assurances. I immediately scanned the documents and sent them to her. "Perfect," she said, her voice betraying no surprise. "This is exactly what we wanted him to do. Now we can formally present our case to a judge. This is where he loses control and the law takes over." She explained the process. We would file a response, detailing my defenses, counterclaiming harassment and retaliation, and presenting all the evidence of the unmade repairs and his subsequent intimidation. She walked me through what to expect in court, the importance of presenting myself professionally, and the strength of the evidence we had meticulously collected. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. Emily and I spent hours reviewing every photo, every email, every note. We organized them chronologically, building a compelling narrative of neglect, followed by harassment and retaliation. The broken window, the leaking ceiling, the mold in the bathroom, the faulty wiring, the unannounced visits, the threatening phone call, the overflowing garbage, the dark hallway. Each piece of evidence became a brick in the wall we were building against his claims. I became an amateur investigator in my own life, constantly aware of my surroundings, my phone always ready to capture a photo or record an audio clip. I learned to identify the subtle signs of his presence, the way the light glinted off his car, the sound of his footsteps, the particular scent of his expensive cologne. It was exhausting, living in a constant state of alert, but it was also empowering. I was actively fighting back, not just passively enduring. My friends and family, when I finally confided in them about the full extent of the situation, offered an outpouring of support. Some offered to help me move if it came to that. Others just listened, offering emotional solace. Their belief in me, their outrage at the landlord's behavior, fueled my resolve. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about standing up for what was right, for the principle that a home should be safe, and a landlord accountable. The day of the court hearing loomed large, a terrifying yet strangely anticipated milestone. I had never been to court before, and the idea of facing my landlord, a man who had tried to intimidate and crush me in a formal legal setting, filled me with a mixture of dread and grim satisfaction. This was where his connections and his money would meet the cold, impartial gaze of the law. This was where I would finally have my voice heard. Not just by Emily, but by a system designed to protect the vulnerable from the powerful. I was ready. I was terrified, but most importantly, I was ready to fight. The courthouse was a grand, imposing building, all cold marble and hushed corridors. The air hummed with a nervous energy, a constant undercurrent of human drama unfolding behind closed doors. Emily met me at the entrance, her expression calm and reassuring. She looked professional, sharp, a stark contrast to my own churning stomach and slightly clammy hands. "Remember everything we discussed," she said, her voice low. "Speak clearly, stick to the facts, and let me do the talking unless the judge asks you directly. You have nothing to be ashamed of. You are the one in the right here." We found our courtroom, a surprisingly small room with dark wood paneling and a raised bench for the judge. My landlord was already there, seated at the plaintiff's table with his own lawyer, a sleek, expensive-looking man in a tailored suit. My landlord caught my eye, a sneer twisting his lips, a look of contempt that he clearly expected to intimidate me. I met his gaze, refusing to flinch, a silent defiance burning within me. He had underestimated me from the start. The proceedings began, a blur of legal jargon and formalities. Emily presented our case with precision and clarity, laying out the timeline of neglect, the documented request for repairs, the partial rent payment, and then the subsequent